Tribulations by Betsib and Midnight in Japan. Part 4. They were back in the Poseidon cabin, tangled together on their makeshift bed. Their kisses were shy and unfamiliar, nothing like in the dream trial, but they made Percy feel light, and he couldn't get over how his every touch made Nico blush. He also couldn't keep his fingers out of that silky black hair, and Nico's arms were wrapped around him, clinging like he was afraid Percy would vanish. "You're tired," he mumbled to Nico. "You should sleep." He said it for Nico's own good, but he didn't want to stop. They were being pretty innocent, but there was something brewing under the surface. It was like everything in him had been waiting to be this close to Nico, and he knew it could easily go too far.
"Suddenly, I'm not sleepy,"
said Nico as he kissed Percy again. This kiss was different, hungrier than the others, and it forced a moan from Percy. He pressed himself closer to Nico, no longer caring about going too far.
"My lady, surely you can see it's over now?" asked Aphrodite gently. "I don't believe the final trial is necessary."
"Are you forfeiting, Aphrodite?" Hera asked coolly. The other goddess sighed. "If you wish to call it that, by all means do. But I do not have the heart to ruin their peace." "You started this with your vanity and boasting," Hera said angrily. "I do not accept your forfeit. You opened this door, and now we will walk through it." "What can you hope to gain?" Aphrodite asked in disbelief. "Look at them. If you won't accept this, how do I know you will end this after the final trial?" "I swear it on the sticks. The next trial will be the last." They were interrupted in the middle of kissing by two figures standing over them, and Percy almost fell out of the bed when he realized who it was.
"Why are you here?"
he demanded.
"I thought it was over."
"Not quite yet," Hera said, smiling like his distress amused her. "There's one final trial left." "Why? What's the point?" Percy asked, putting an arm around Nico, who seemed embarrassed by the earlier display of affection in front of the goddesses. "We're already together."
"We know, and I'm so happy for you,"
Aphrodite said, smiling apologetically.
"But Queen Hera has insisted on one final proof of your love for each other."
"We don't have a choice, do we?" Percy muttered. "Excellent," Hera said and clapped her hands once. A table with two chairs appeared from nowhere. On the table stood two goblets filled with a colorless liquid. It looked like water, but Percy could tell it was something different. "So what, we drink from the goblets?" Percy asked.
"This trial is designed to test how well you know each other,"
Aphrodite said.
"No fights, no tricks, just a few simple questions."
"So what's the catch?"
Nico asked, narrowing his eyes suspiciously. "It's very simple," Hera said. "Each time you answer wrong, a sip of the goblet must be taken. However, the last drop, and only the last drop, in each goblet is a fatal poison. As long as you get enough answers right, you'll be fine."
"This isn't fair,"
Nico said.
"I can't even answer all questions about me, and we've never talked that much about ourselves."
"I would have thought the challenges so far had encouraged you to actually get to know each other," Hera said, smiling dangerously. "Especially since you started your little fling." "It's not a fling!" Percy exclaimed angrily. "And we've only really been together for less than a day." "But you've been friends for years. That should be plenty of time to get to know each other," Hera said. "Or are you already admitting defeat?" "Never," Percy said between gritted teeth. "Ask your questions, then leave us alone." "Excellent," Hera said. "Sit down and we'll start. There will be 10 questions for each of you." They sat down on opposite sides of the table, each with a goblet in front of them. Nico's hands seemed to be trembling slightly, so Percy reached out for him and took a firm hold of one of his hands. "We'll be okay," he said, trying to sound confident. Nico gave him a pale smile.
"I'm not so sure,"
he said quietly. "How sweet!" Hera said sarcastically, while Aphrodite remained silent, looking more apologetic than ever. "First question, then. Let's start off with an easy one. What's the other's favorite color?" "What does that question prove?" Percy said. "Just answer." "Blue," Nico said without hesitation. Percy gave him a smile, but then frowned. He actually wasn't sure. Black?" he guessed, which caused the liquid in his goblet to turn a poisonous green. Percy sighed as he took his first sip, grimacing at the sour taste. Sorry, what is the right answer?
Green.
Nico said.
There was no way you could have known.
Except for asking, of course. Hera said happily. Next question. What worldly possession do the other treasure the most?
I'm guessing Riptide.
Nico said uncertainly, and Percy nodded, which wasn't really necessary, seeing as how Nico's drink remained clear. Again, I honestly don't know, Percy said, beginning to feel bad about how little attention he had paid to Nico over the years. Your sword?
Sorry, it's the Hades figurine. Remember?
Nico said, and Percy nodded as he took another sip. At this rate, he was as good as dead. Let's move on. The other's worst nightmare, Hera said, looking like she had won already. Tartarus, Nico and Percy said in unison, and both drinks remained clear. Aphrodite gave them a smile, but Hera seemed disappointed. Why don't you ask the next question? She told the other goddess, who frowned but took a step forward.
What is the main trait the other loves and admires in you?
She asked, and this time neither of them answered for a while. A while back, Percy begun hesitantly, looking at Nico, you said something about me doing anything for my friends and never betraying someone I cared about.
I did.
Nico confirmed, then stared it down into his goblet.
I'm not sure. You said you wanted to be with me, but I'm not sure why. I guess you just like having me around.
That's not specific enough, Hera said, and the liquid in Nico's goblet changed color. Drink! What do you mean not specific enough? Percy said angrily, even as Nico drank. I like all of them, all right?
Just leave it, Percy. We'll talk about this later if we get a chance.
Nico said sternly. Next question is the opposite. What do the other find the most annoying about you? Hera asked, and don't even try to convince me it's nothing.
Probably that I tend to withdraw into my shell and bottle things up rather than reach out.
Nico guessed correctly. Percy squeezed his hand and gave him a smile. You're getting better, he said. I'm not sure. My obliviousness?
Your willingness to do anything for your friends.
Nico said, shrugging helplessly at Percy's confused expression.
I can't help it. Your most attractive trait is also your most annoying.
I guess that makes sense, Percy sighed as he took another sip of his drink. There was dangerously little left on the cup now. He counted maybe 3 sips if he was lucky, and there were still 5 questions left. As a child, what was the other's dream job? Hera asked them. Oh, come on! Percy exclaimed. How could we possibly know that? Again, by asking and having actual conversations, as people do in relationships, Hera said. And this question could have multiple answers, so I think it's fair. You wouldn't know fair even if it hit you in the face, Percy muttered. Fine. Myth of Magic champion?
I wasn't aware that could be a job,
Nico said, sounding slightly amused despite the situation.
It's going to sound crazy, but I actually wanted to become a pilot.
Really? Percy asked, laughing even as he drank. I have to tell Jason about this.
Please don't. He flies around with me enough as it is.
Nico said.
And I don't know. I'm guessing policeman.
Percy laughed. I'm sure every little boy have wanted to become a cop at some point. He nodded. Hera was visibly starting to get annoyed and was glaring daggers into Nico. No wonder the boy had only gotten one wrong answer so far. Aphrodite, on the other hand, looked proud of it. Percy just felt increasingly bad for knowing so little about it. Moving on, Hera said harshly. Is the other a cat person or a dog person? Percy stared at her for a moment before laughing out loud. You're running out of questions, aren't you? The choice says a lot about a person's personality, Hera said sourly, even as Aphrodite was rolling her eyes behind Hera's back. Well, I'd say dog person, Percy said, remembering a younger Nico with Mrs. O'Leary years ago. He'd have to reintroduce them at some point.
I'd say the same,
Nico said, smiling at Percy and probably thinking about the same particular dog.
My lady, may I ask the next question?
Aphrodite asked, and Hera waved at her to go ahead. Aphrodite smiled at him.
What is the biggest regret of the other person concerning you?
Percy could think of a whole lot of things Nico might regret that had to do with him. Trusting him to protect Bianca, running away, lying to him at Camp Jupiter, this whole trial thing. Still, he was pretty certain when he answered. Selling me out to his father. Nico gave him a brief nod, looking down at his own goblet rather than meeting Percy's eyes. I told you I don't blame you for that anymore.
Percy said gently. I still regret it,
Nico said quietly, then took a deep breath.
I'm guessing letting Bianca die, even though it wasn't your fault.
The liquid in both goblets remained clear, and Aphrodite beamed at them.
Just 2 more questions,
she said.
What are the other person's plans for the future?
Hera asked, sounding smug, like she knew she had them. And she was right, because Percy honestly didn't have a clue.
It used to be settling down in New Rome,
Nico said uncertainly.
I'm not sure if it has changed.
It hasn't, except I want you to come with me, Percy confirmed, giving him a smile. Whatever happened during the last question, Nico had already passed the challenge with flying colors, meaning he was safe. Percy was another story entirely. He sighed deeply. I don't have a clue. I'm hoping the same, he said, though he wasn't surprised when the liquid turned green again.
I'm sorry, I've never really thought about staying in New Rome,
Nico said.
I kinda had this crazy plan of moving far away somewhere and maybe study history or medicine or something, but I would definitely stay with you in New Rome if you wanted me to.
That doesn't change the fact that it was the wrong answer, Hera said sternly. Drink! Percy did. There was exactly 1 drop left when he put the goblet back down. If he got the next answer wrong, he was dead. He looked up at Nico, who had realized it as well. He was even paler than he usually was, and his hand was sweaty and trembling. Hey, Percy said, giving him a smile. We'll be fine. Nico gave him a nod, but it was pretty clear he didn't buy it. Last question, Hera said with all the force of a reality show host trying to build suspense. What has been the most important decision the other person have ever made? Percy stared into his goblet, realizing he was dead. Still, he wanted to hear Nico's answer before he attempted one of his own. He wanted to spend as much time together as they could before taking the final sip. Out of all the ways Percy could have died over the years, this really wasn't how he thought it would happen, but at least it would mean Nico would be free from the goddesses, and maybe they could still be together in the underworld?
I'm not sure,
Nico said uncertainly.
You have made a lot of important decisions, some of which have changed the world. Giving up immortality so that the minor gods could get recognition?
Nico's drink turned green and he drank without another word. Maybe he realized Percy wasn't sure about the answer himself. Right now, the decision to take these trials seemed more important, though in the grand scheme of things, it probably wasn't. The decision to transport the statue to Camp Half-Blood? Percy guessed, already knowing it was wrong as he said it. Suddenly, Nico stood up, leaning across the table to capture Percy's lips in a kiss. Their last, Percy realized. He wanted to savor the feeling, but Nico suddenly pulled back, and Percy opened his eyes, confused.
I love you,
Nico told him. He was holding a goblet in his hands, and it took Percy a second to realize it was his goblet. Nico, don't! He screamed, but too late. Before Percy could stop him, he had already taken the final sip of the goblet, and the last fatal drop of poison. Nico stilled, his eyes becoming unfocused.
It was the only way,
he said, sounding distant, as all the color disappeared from his face. No! Percy yelled as the goblet fell out of Nico's hands, and the boy's legs didn't seem to hold him anymore. Percy grabbed a hold of him, keeping him standing. You can't do this! It was supposed to be me! I was the one to screw up! Nico didn't answer. His eyes lingered on Percy's face for a moment, then closed. His body relaxed against Percy. He broke the rules, right? Percy yelled at the goddesses. We failed the trial, right? So there's no need for this to happen. Fix it! The last drop has been drunk. I never said who had to drink it, Hera said ruthlessly. Then we forfeit. You win, Percy begged. I don't care. Just help him. It's too late. The final trial is over. You won, Aphrodite said. She had tears in her eyes, but that didn't matter to Percy right now. Like hell we did, Percy screamed. It can't end like this. Help him. I'll do anything. Just please save him. Even if we asked you to die in his place, Hera asked, narrowing her eyes. Yes, Percy said without hesitation. Now help him. Hera sighed and turned towards Aphrodite. It looks like you were right for once, she said. Very well, I gracefully admit defeat. I appreciate it, my lady, Aphrodite said, and Hera disappeared, taking the table and the goblets with her. Aphrodite smiled towards Percy and kneeled down beside them to stroke Nico's cheek. It will be fine, Percy, she said, as a reward from me for completing the trials. He will be saved. He will wake up in an hour or so. Percy breathed out in relief, holding Nico close. He was probably crying, though he didn't particularly care.
Your love is truly incredible, Aphrodite said. If he hadn't taken the poison from you, if you hadn't offered your life to save his, Hera might never have been truly convinced.
Just leave us alone,
Percy told her. Aphrodite gave him a sad smile, then disappeared as well. Percy remained on the floor with Nico unconscious in his arms. When Nico opened his eyes, he expected to be in the underworld waiting room, but instead he looked up and saw the gray ceiling of the Poseidon cabin. At first he was confused, but then he recognized the scent invading his nostrils. He wouldn't know that smell anywhere. Still, he blinked a few times to clear his eyes and be sure. When he turned his head, he saw Percy sitting on his side of the bed on the edge of the mattress, with his back facing Nico. His shoulders were slumped and everything about him radiated tension.
Percy,
he called softly. Percy looked so stricken that Nico couldn't find any more words. Whatever he would have said next was doused from his mind by the look on Percy's face. His beautiful sea-green eyes were dark from crying, the tiny red veins giving the whites of his eyes a pink hue. Nico only had a second to notice these things, because Percy immediately crawled across their makeshift bed and gathered him up in his arms.
I thought you were gone,
Percy said sadly. He released Nico and touched his face like he was making sure he was alive.
What happened? I thought... You tried to kill yourself,
Percy said, his voice and expression heading in an angry direction.
I couldn't let you die,
Nico said simply. He felt strangely calm and happy in all of this. He expected to be dead, to be ripped away from Percy forever, but now he was back. Percy could get as mad as he wanted.
Nico, you're the son of Hades. If I died, you could still see me, summon my spirit, or go to the underworld and visit me. It might not be what we want, but it would be something. If you die, I have nothing.
Something inside of Percy seemed to deflate as if he were just working all this out. Nico felt hurt because he'd never thought of it that way either.
I'd have no way to see you,
Percy continued.
I'd just have to wait to die and hope we could be together then. I'm sorry,
he said.
You're right, but I'm here. We both are.
He slid his hand into Percy's. That chased away the sad look in the older boy's eyes, and he smiled.
It's over, you know. The trials. We won,
he said.
What?
Nico sat up quickly, but his stomach rolled in response, and he felt himself turn green.
Oh, gods.
He gripped Percy's hand and wrapped his other arm around his middle.
Are you okay? Asked Percy. Yeah, I guess that poison or whatever made me nauseous. But we won? Really?
He smiled in spite of the gross feeling rising in the back of his throat.
Yeah, I offered to trade my life for yours, and that apparently convinced Hera.
Percy rubbed the side of his face, but Nico was stuck staring at him in shock.
Percy, I think it might be better if you just went ahead and threw that stuff up.
He laughed.
You're going a little green.
About 10 minutes later, Nico walked out of the bathroom, with feeling much better, and with freshly brushed teeth. He smiled at Percy and tried to fight the heat rising in his cheeks.
Should we go tell Chiron it's over?
He asked. Percy's brow furrowed as he thought about it, and then he grinned. No, not yet.
Why?
Asked Nico as he walked over to him.
We won. We should tell Jason and Piper too.
But if we tell, began Percy as he reached up and grabbed Nico's hand to pull him down onto the bed,
then Chiron will know we're not bound together anymore, and he'll make us separate.
He leaned over and kissed Nico's cheek.
I'm not ready for that yet.
Nico gave up fighting his blush and couldn't help staring at Percy's face. He had dreamed of it, but never thought he would actually see Percy looking at him that way. It was like Percy was seeing him for the first time, and as self-conscious as he was, that look made him feel special.
I just got you back,
Percy continued and ran his fingers through Nico's hair, making him shiver.
Now, what were we doing before we were interrupted?
Nico's mind went joyfully numb as Percy kissed him again. As usual, part of him worried that this was just another dream, but no, this felt way too real. He knew now the dream trial had not been this vivid. Cognitive thinking was muddy, but everything else, especially his sense of touch, was incredibly sharp. He could feel Percy's lips, Percy's tongue, his fingers in his hair, massaging his scalp and lulling him deeper into this haze.
Before he knew it, Percy was on top of him between his legs. When he laid back on the bed? When Percy pulled away and started kissing behind his ear, he whimpered and tugged at the older boy's shirt, threatening to rip it. His inhibitions were gone, and his guard dropped. "I love you." It slipped out of his mouth before he could think or stop himself. He'd whispered it right in Percy's ear, so he couldn't even hope to cover it up. He froze, and so did Percy. But before he could start apologizing profusely, Percy kissed him again. "It's okay," he whispered back and kissed Nico again. A knock on the door shouted a moment and made them jump. "Percy? Nico?" It was Jason's voice, and Percy groaned and buried his head in Nico's shoulder. Jason knocked again, and Nico knew he was minutes away from busting in on them. Percy must have known it too, because he sighed and sat up on his knees. His lips were dark pink, his hair and clothes were ruffled, his green eyes were beginning to clear, but at the moment they were clouded with lust. That alone made Nico want to pull him back down. Jason or no. "Yeah? What is it?" Percy called. "You two okay?" Jason asked through the door. Percy rolled his eyes, and Nico smothered a laugh. "We're fine," he said. "Are you guys coming to breakfast?" "Yeah, we'll be there in a minute," Percy sighed. "Do we have to go?" Nico asked, trying not to sound whiny. Percy chuckled softly and leaned down to kiss him one more time. "We'd have better put in an appearance, and I guess you were right. We need to tell them." Jason and Piper laughed and hugged them both when they told them the trials were over. They didn't tell them the details, though. It felt kind of private. Tyron seemed to notice, and though he didn't push the issue, his expression turned serious. "Well done," he said. "Now I believe you should take some time apart to think things through." "What?" Percy exclaimed, protectively pulling Nico just a little closer to him. "We went through all that to find each other, and now you want us to separate? No way!" "I'm not saying you should break up," Kyron said. "Just that the trials put an enormous strain on both of you, and that you were manipulated from the start. You should take some time to work through all that, separately, or you might start to doubt that your affection for each other is actually your own."
"It's definitely real," Piper said angrily. "I can feel it radiating off them. There's no point to keep them apart anymore."
"I'm not going to keep them apart," Kyron said, holding up a hand. "They are not allowed to sleep in the same cabin anymore, but other than that, it's their own choice. It was a friendly advice, nothing more."
"Thanks, but I think we're good,"
Percy said, playfully ruffling Nico's hair as Kyron left the room.
However, Nico looked uncertain. Percy saw him exchange a few uncertain glances with Jason, who gave a hopeless shrug, as if to say he had no idea. "Percy, maybe he's right," he said quietly. "Maybe we should take some time apart. Not long, just a week or two."
Percy looked at him in surprise.
"Nico, I don't doubt your feelings for me," he said, frowning. "Are you saying you still doubt mine? I was ready to give my life for you, you know." "You were ready to do that in the first trial already," Nico pointed out. "And no, I don't doubt you. I just think that you might, if you never get the chance to think things through."
Percy honestly couldn't believe what he was hearing and was just about to say so when Jason interrupted him.
"Percy, I know this isn't really my business, but from an outsider's perspective, it looks like you were forced together by two goddesses, which doesn't mean your feelings aren't real, of course," he said uncertainly, glancing at Piper. "But you haven't really been apart more than a few hours at most since the trial started." "I already went through this thought process yesterday before the last trial," Percy said. "I have thought things through." "Just indulge me, okay?" Nico said in a gentle tone, putting his hand over Percy's. "We've been manipulated enough for several lifetimes, both of us. Let me just make sure." "Fine," Percy groaned. 2 weeks." "Thank you," Nico said, leaning in to kiss him like he suspected it was the last time.
"You can't blame him for being cautious,"
Percy's mother said as she turned the blue pancakes over in the frying pan.
"Besides, spending some time apart to sort out your feelings is only healthy."
"I know. I just miss him," Percy said gloomily. He had lasted exactly 2 days at Camp Apple without Nico, alone in the suddenly extremely large and quiet Poseidon cabin before leaving to stay with his mother for a few days. She had been surprised by the turn of events, but just told him to bring Nico around as soon as he came back. However, she did agree with Nico's decision to spend time apart. His mother smiled sadly at him.
"Love is complicated enough without goddesses being involved,"
she said. "Tell me about it," Percy sighed. "When he comes back, I want it to be just us, but we're not even allowed to be in each other's cabins anymore."
His mother smiled. Well, you don't have to go to camp, right? She said. If you promise to be responsible, I might be able to help you with that.
Percy looked up at her. What do you have in mind? Nico would have expected Percy to be at Camp Half-Blood when the 2 weeks were up. If not, maybe New Rome or his mother's house. Instead, as he shadow traveled towards Percy's life force, he ended up somewhere he had never been before. It was a sandy beach by the ocean. A cabin stood a bit away from there, slightly smaller than the ones at camp. Percy himself was, unsurprisingly, swimming around underwater and probably hadn't noticed Nico yet. Smiling to himself, Nico sat down on the beach to wait. When Percy emerged from the water a bit later, he took one look at Nico and gave him a huge, happy smile. "Nico!" he shouted, and all Nico's fears of rejections disappeared, and he got on his feet and ran through the water into Percy's arms, accidentally knocking him off balance. They tumbled down into the shallow water together, and Percy laughed as they went down. The water was pretty cold, but it didn't matter. Percy was holding him, pulling him closer, and kissing him, and that was the only thing that existed right then. "Hey!" Percy smiled as he pulled back, running a hand through Nico's hair. Nico was basically sitting in his lap with the water reaching up to his waist. "Hey," Nico answered, blushing a bit over his earlier desperation. "I missed you." "I can tell," Percy grinned. "I missed you too." He leaned back in for another kiss, and Nico pulled him tighter, never wanting to let go again. After a while, they had to get out of the water, and Percy dried them off as they walked towards the cabin, hand in hand. "You can't do anything about the sand as well?" Nico asked, wondering just how he had managed to get sand everywhere that fast. Percy laughed. "That's more your territory than mine." Nico rolled his eyes. "What are we doing here anyway?" he asked. "Where are we?" "My mother rented us this cabin for a week as a present," Percy said, "since I told her I wanted to be alone with you for a while." "Alone?" Nico repeated, feeling his cheeks grow hot. Percy stopped, giving him a concerned look. "We don't have to do anything you don't want to," he said. "I just wanted to spend some time with you, just the two of us. I really missed you." "No, it's just... Nico tried to give up and pushed their lips together again, hoping to convey what he was feeling that way. Percy grinned happily when they parted. "So, can I carry you over the threshold?" he asked, and Nico playfully slapped his head. "I'm not a girl, and we're not married." Percy laughed. "We are kinda on our honeymoon," he said, taking Nico's hand again. "Come on, let me carry you." Nico wasn't fond of being carried, but Percy was giving him the most adorable puppy eyes he'd ever seen, so he grumbled. "Fine." He gave in, then yelped as Percy wasted no time in picking him up. "You don't weigh anything at all," Percy said. "You need to eat more." "If you're going to start complaining, I'm not letting you carry me," Nico threatened, and Percy laughed. "Understood," he said, then continued walking towards the cabin, hesitating at the door. Think you can get the door open?" Percy asked sheepishly. "My hands are kind of full." Nico snickered, reaching out to open the door. "You haven't really got the whole romance act together, have you?" "Hey, I'm doing my best," Percy said defensively, walking sideways through the door so Nico wouldn't hit his head. Nico looked around. The cabin was small, but the kitchen counter in one corner and a table in the other. The double bed took up most of the space, and that's where they were heading. Nico's face was burning as Percy slowly lowered him down on the bed and climbed on top of him. "You okay?" Percy asked, giving him a brief, gentle kiss. "Yep," Nico said breathlessly. Perfect. It's just... "Just what?" Percy frowned. "Am I moving too fast?" "No, it's not that," Nico said, uncomfortably blushing again. "But I'm pretty sure I have sand in my underwear, and I think I should take a shower." Percy blinked, then slumped down, burying his head in Nico's shoulder as he laughed. "You're adorable," he said, then gave Nico a kiss on the eyelid before climbing off. "I could probably use a shower myself, to be honest, but you go first." Nico considered suggesting they shower together, but bit his lip. He wasn't quite sure how to approach this. He wanted it, and he was pretty sure Percy wanted it too, but he needed to mentally prepare himself for this. So he showered and got out so Percy could get in. He was relieved when Percy didn't push him. They just climbed into bed and held each other in the dark. It was like being back in the Poseidon cabin again, and it made Nico feel comfortable and safe. "So what did you do while you were gone?" asked Percy quietly. His hand was rubbing circles in the small of Nico's back and would occasionally glide across his hip and up his side, then back down again to resume the circular massage. Nico didn't even know if Percy noticed he was doing it, but combined with the sound of gentle rushing waves outside, it made him sleepy. I went to New Rome to see Hazel. She's happy for us, by the way.
He yawned loudly, and Percy giggled.
Stop putting me to sleep,
Nico said in mock anger.
Sorry,
said Percy, and his hand stopped.
Anyway, she actually started crying, and I thought I'd never get away once she hugged me. Just a warning, she's probably going to do the same thing to you once you see her again. Did you ever think everyone would be so happy to see us together? I mean, were we such an obvious match?
Percy asked.
His hand had started rubbing Nico's back again, and far from being annoyed, it made Nico smile. Percy was so comfortable that he didn't notice he was doing it. It was something small, but it made him glad. I don't know, but I'm happy too. Me too, Percy whispered and somehow found his lips in the dark. The next few days were a blurry bliss. They were alone together without nosy campers or pestering goddesses. They spent a lot of time walking, talking, and burning meals, which usually resulted in Nico shadow traveling them to the nearest fast food place. There was a little problem with some wild harpies, but they handled that quickly. They tried things and experimented a little in bed. Being secluded on the beach with no expectations or responsibilities meant giving in and indulging their raging teenage hormones. Percy always seemed to know when to stop, but as Nico grew more comfortable, he wanted to stop less and less. And as they discovered new things about each other and themselves, Nico realized that he liked to give more than he got. It might have been the fact that he was mostly still floating in a state of awe. He could touch Percy, and Percy wanted to be touched by him. Watching Percy's eyelids flutter close, hearing him moan, and knowing it was his fault, was more empowering than killing any monster. He also discovered that Percy liked to be directed. He wanted to know exactly what Nico wanted, and how. Saying those things out loud was embarrassing at first, but the results outweighed that. It wasn't until the day before their last day in the cabin that he knew they were done waiting. When he woke up, Percy wasn't wrapped around him like he usually was. He was in the little kitchen area, and Nico couldn't tell what he was attempting to make until Percy came over with an ugly but unburnt ham and cheese omelet and some orange juice. He grinned in that big goofy way that Nico loved. Why couldn't you pull this off all week? Nico asked, laughing. I finally got my technique down, Percy said confidently. We might have to go out for lunch and dinner, though. We're out of everything. That's fine. Thank you, he said, and then took a bite. Well, it's actually not bad. They ate and decided to spend the day in the nearby city. There were resorts on the other side of the beach, and Percy bought them slushies as they walked around looking at all the tourist attractions. I have no idea how our little patch of beach is so untouched by all of this, said Nico, looking around. There were hundreds of people strolling about in very little clothing. The sidewalk was cluttered with hot dog and ice cream stands, along with screaming children. Private owners, said Percy as he sipped his blue slush. My mom's been renting that cabin from them for years, and they refuse to let this near their part of the beach. I'm glad, said Nico. It's nice to get out, but I like how quiet we have it. They ate hot dogs and found an arcade that made Nico happy because it reminded him of the time he spent in the Lotus Hotel with Bianca. But it wasn't until dinner that he realized he was on an actual date. It seemed stupid, but he'd never realized that he and Percy were a couple now. They were together, and he loved him, but he just never clicked into place that he was Percy's boyfriend until they were being seated in a restaurant. He was afraid he was blushing, and everyone could see, but tried to ignore it. When they finally went back to the cabin, Percy begged him to go swimming. It was like scuba diving without all the heavy, clumsy gear. Percy could just form an air bubble around them underwater as they explored the sea. Nico was still annoyed about being covered in sand, but he expected it after sprawling out on the shore with Percy. Time to go in? Percy asked, still lying on his back, smiling. Nico wrinkled up his nose as he tried to brush the sand off his arms and legs. The rough substance had actually given him the worst exfoliation ever. He could feel the sand burn in some places. Yeah, I need a shower. Then maybe some ambrosia. It's not that bad, Percy laughed as he stood up and offered Nico a hand. Inside, he ate half a square of ambrosia and headed straight for the shower. He could feel a tension between them right now. It appeared the moment they stepped back into the cabin, and it made his stomach flip. When he'd gotten undressed and stepped into the warm water, he was torn between making this as quick as possible to hurry back to Percy and just staying where he was, nervous and almost trembling. He hadn't really reached a decision when there was a knock on the door before it opened. Could I join you? Percy's voice said on the other side of the shower curtain, sounding strangely thick. Nico hesitated, then took a deep breath. Sure, he said, his voice cracking a bit, but Percy seemed to hear him. The next section of the story contains adult content, so I've skipped that part. If you wish to read it, you can click the link in the descriptions. When he woke up, he felt so sore and stiff that he nearly groaned out loud. He stopped himself when he realized he would wake Percy. His boyfriend was cuddled up to him with his face so close Nico could feel Percy's gentle puffs of breath in his ear. He still felt content, but the afterglow was gone, which was the only thing masking the pain before. He tried to drift back off, but he couldn't ignore his aches enough to do it, so he just laid there listening to Percy sleep. It was worse when Percy finally did wake up and wanted to shower together and go to breakfast. When Nico tried to get out of bed, he couldn't hide his wincing, and he even limped a little. Percy was at his side immediately, fussing over him and apologizing profusely. He insisted Nico eat some ambrosia and nectar, and instead of fooling around in the shower, which he was sure Percy wanted to do when he first suggested it, he only helped Nico wash since he was so sore. He had to admit the warm water helped, and the ambrosia kicked in fast. He was a lot less sore by the time they got out, so they still went to breakfast. But it was their last day in the cabin, and they didn't want to spend it around the noisy tourists. They went back right after dumping their shoes on the front step and walking along the beach and letting their feet get wet as the tide rolled in. We have to leave tomorrow, Nico said out loud, sighing as he looked off into the distance. Yeah, honeymoon's over, Percy said just as sadly. He teased Nico's fingers with his own, lacing and unlacing them as they walked along. It was a little cloudy out, so the sun didn't beat down on them, making the walk uncomfortable. We could do this again, though, right? Nico asked hopefully, looking at Percy with huge dark eyes. Yeah, but what about New Rome? Percy asked uncertainly. Do you really want to move there with me? Only if you want to, and we don't have to go right away, said Percy nervously. I love Camp Half-Blood, and we can always go visit, but having to sleep in separate cabins every night? I can't go back to that, at least not for too long. I'd wake up missing you every morning. I want to, said Nico. But are you ready to face Annabeth? Yeah, I know she won't hate us for being happy, and besides, maybe she's found someone else by now. Then I guess we need to make a quick trip to check out housing in New Rome, Nico said and smiled at him. Percy grinned and threw an arm around Nico's shoulders, pulling him close. I love you, he whispered in Nico's ear, making the younger boy blush deeply. I love you too, he replied and kissed Percy. Making out on the beach is a pretty romantic last day, Percy said when he pulled back. Not in the sand, said Nico, looking adamant. In the water? Percy asked hopefully. In the water, agreed Nico, and then he let Percy walk him into the waves.
My lady, Queen Hera is here to see you,
said the nymph. Of course, there was no option to refuse to see Hera. This was more a warning that Hera was entering her palace. Since the end of the trials, she and Hera had maintained a tense silence. She won, but the Queen of the Gods was a sore loser. Aphrodite reclined on a pink and white chaise, eating cherries and watching her favorite soap opera. She didn't bother to stand as Hera strolled into the room.
It's lovely to see you, Queen Hera,
she said flatly, still looking at the TV. Aphrodite, we should try to put this whole silly thing behind us. All of Olympus can feel our tension. You won the game. For the sake of the family.
Yes, all right.
Aphrodite often tried not to roll her eyes. Anything to make Hera shut up and stop her family speeches. Well, said Hera briskly, glad that's done. She paused and looked awkwardly around the room. How are they? She asked finally, clearly trying to sound casual. Aphrodite did roll her eyes this time as she picked up the remote and flipped the channel. Percy and Nico appeared on the screen, walking along the beach. Aphrodite couldn't help the smile that came to her face as she watched them. They listened to the young couple's plans for the future, and she felt tears prick her eyes. They really do love each other, said Hera softly.
Yes, said Aphrodite quietly. Even I don't get to see a love like this very often. It took me decades to make this happen.
For what it's worth, I do agree that it would have been a shame to ruin it, said the Queen awkwardly.
It's very beautiful.
Yes, said Aphrodite, unable to tear her eyes away from the two boys tangled together in the water.
It's very rare, too. And the only thing more beautiful than watching it is experiencing it.
I wouldn't know anything about it,
said Hera as she turned and left the way she came. Aphrodite watched her go and pitied her. Hera knew just as well as she did that Metis was Zeus's true love, but he'd ruined his own happiness out of fear, and now he and Hera were stuck together. The universe needed their union for balance, and there was no way out. The goddess of love turned back to the flat screen and smiled as she watched Percy pushing Nico's long wet hair out of his eyes. There was nothing she could do for Hera, but she could protect what was in front of her. She walked up to the screen and blew a palm full of pink glitter at it. It floated right through the TV as if it were a teleporter. The boys couldn't see it, but the glitter was all around them now.
Nothing will ever threaten your peace again,
she said.
Just like I promised.
End of Tribulations by Betsib at Midnight in Japan. If you enjoy this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or a review at the original story from the link in the descriptions. You can also subscribe to the channel or become a member. Thank you for listening.